admit that I'm really excited about these results. It's a complete game changer for me. I feel that I'm actually doing some of the best teaching I've ever done right now, which I know is surprising probably to hear. I also can admit that I was pretty skeptical about online teaching.
Today's guest is one of my favorite people on the planet. He's somebody who just brightens my day and gives me energy every time I interact with him. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and Nicholas Walker is no stranger to the podcast. He's definitely in contention for one of the most frequently featured guests. It's probably the fourth or fifth time he's been on the show, and he took a sabbatical last year from his job as professor of double bass at Ithaca College. Incidentally, the site of the 2017 International Society of Bassists Convention, one of my favorite recent memories. And so, COVID and the pandemic and everything resulted in the latter half of that year. So Nicholas came back to his job with a vastly different teaching situation. Ithaca College moved online for the present moment, at least. And Nicholas, which is not surprising to me, found a way to utilize this constraint, we'll say, in a positive way for his teaching. That's what this episode is about. So we dig into the 4 pedagogical components of his approach: fundamentals, performance, deliberate practice, and lessons, how his weekly program runs, how he uses pre-recorded videos to enhance the teaching experience, thinking of lessons as meetings, and much more. You're going to love this episode if you have any interest in teaching or how people are coping with the pandemic or anything like that. So let's dive into it. We'll hear a little bit of Nicholas playing bass at the beginning and end. What a fantastic player in addition to everything else he does. Again, I can't say enough good things about this human being. And thank you so much. Quick shout out to our sponsors, Dorico, Ear Trumpet Labs, Practisma, and Modacity. More on them later, but let's dig into this conversation with the wonderful person and teacher and bassist, Nicholas Walker. So Ithaca College is completely online this semester. What is that like?
Yes, we're fortunate to have some extraordinary leaders on campus who made that very difficult decision when it became clear that even after months of planning, an on-campus semester just couldn't be safe or responsible beginning in September or October. So there are a lot of people working really hard and really well to steer Ithaca College through these challenges. It hasn't been easy for the families of people, who've been furloughed, like some of the dining hall staff and some of the maintenance workers and other such people. It was a really hard decision to make with real consequences for folks. But I think it was the right decision.
Well, and it's something that we're all trying to figure out as we go. And somebody in your position, teaching like you do, it's got to have changed the experience just so radically. So how has it impacted your teaching and the student learning experience?
Yeah, a lot. But I think largely positively, because actually I've been planning for this possibility all summer, with like a lot of people. I've been out of work in terms of performances, so it's gave me a lot of opportunity to focus on this. So I've talked a lot with students and their families and with teachers and colleagues around the country. You and I have had a few conversations, and those conversations led me to reimagine both lessons and learning. So I've built something new that leverages the opportunities of online learning and also addresses the needs and concerns of students and the fear that they have about doing this online. And I say fear because totally separate from the devastating loss of health and in some cases loss of life and the loss of employment and income that many people are experiencing around COVID, there's also a loss of direction and control that a lot of people feel, which can be very frustrating for folks, right? And so as you and your listeners know, many students have worked really hard and planned really hard to get where they are right now. And they have a huge family structure and a family history of commitment behind them. So all of this has suddenly been shaken up for them.
So how are your students doing?
Obviously, there's a range of impact for different people, and some are managing more challenges than others. But essentially, I and my students have a lot of privilege and a lot of support behind us to work with. I mean, what I mean by that is, okay, we have our health, but we also have computers and a camera and a microphone, broadband internet, It's different for each student, but in general, each of us has a really supportive family or housemates or household behind us and home environments that allow us to get some really focused work done in a space that we have all to ourselves. I mean, without sharing one computer in an apartment with 5 other children in primary school and a single parent who's working from home on that one computer, for example. That's really hard and different situation than what most of us are dealing with. So, and on top of this privilege, we also don't have the misfortunes and anxieties of hurricanes and wildfires bearing down on our communities like some folks do. So some of my students are back at home with their parents, and others have moved to Ithaca and are podding, with other Ithaca College music students in a shared rental house. But they've all found a good place to work, and those who are stuck back in their childhood bedrooms have been creative in finding new innovative ways to work, like building a bass cave in the basement, for example. So yeah, we're all in pretty good shape. And as I say, aware of our privilege and our fortune too.
Yeah, and the equity issue, the access to technology and resources, that's so huge. I was chatting with a couple of folks from the Opportunity Music Project in New York City and what that experience has been like. And there's no sound so terrible as a double bass E string through an iPhone speaker. So once you get to a certain level of technology, then some possibilities open up and some opportunities open up. So what are some of those opportunities that you're leveraging through online learning, even though you're not together in the same space?
Yeah, exactly. So the very important discussion of equity and access to technology aside, and of course, the fact that we all miss being together in the same room aside, the impact socially of this aside, ironically, I found that my students and I have much more access to each other right now under this new arrangement that we've invented than ever. The biggest commodities on a college campus are time and space. The move to online learning has shaken all of this up by allowing the possibility of asynchronous learning. Asynchronous, of course, meaning we don't have to be in the same time or the same space to watch or create a video for each other. So that's been the key, finding ways to leverage and blend asynchronous learning with normal one-on-one synchronous lessons in which we meet at the same time, but of course remotely for now, over Zoom or whatever.
So you and I are roughly the same age, went through college in the early 90s, and I remember going to the music library to check out the CD, I think, maybe even LP of Mozart 40 or anything like that, recording myself on my Discman and all those good times. So we fast forward now to here 2020, and we got a lot of new opportunities and changes. So it's a real change from how you and I did music school.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, I remember taking the bus to Syracuse to find a Keith Jarrett American Quartet LP that they had there so I could bring it home and put it on cassette tape. Yeah, those days are very different. But even just how it was 6 or 8 months ago, it's different now. Like, even recently, this past year, the way we used to do lessons is this, right? Like you said, we all meet 1 hour a week in the bass studio for one-on-one lessons. And in that lesson, we try to cover technique, the repertoire that's in preparation for upcoming performances, self-management skills, fundamentals and body awareness, deliberate practice approaches, score study, transcription, orchestral repertoire, chamber music preparation, issues of performance anxiety and professional etiquette and entrepreneurship and all that kind of thing, right? So that's a lot to cover in 1 hour weekly meetings. I mean, What I mean is that a lot of information has to be exchanged in order to cover all that. And because most of the work that a student does, that any artist does, is alone in a practice room, it's critical to exchange information about how to do that work before sending the student off to do the work. So, like any other college, at Ithaca College, we have other meetings that are scheduled to help share that kind of information. So, and also to not just exchange information, but for experiential learning, for students to have experiences. So we have a weekly studio class. We do things like excerpt class and scale and technique classes and master classes and all those kinds of things. But all of this is contingent on scheduling. And at times, just scheduling all of those activities feels nearly impossible. And when scheduling is achieved, it's often packed in there so that students are, dashing from a lesson to a lesson or a meeting between a theory class and a history class. But the thing is, lessons are meetings, right? And as you and I learned together, Jason, in our strategic planning meetings when we were on the board of the ISB, meetings are for, you want to say it together? Meetings are for using information, not exchanging information. And so a flipped classroom model is in which we share videos with each other for part of our lesson experience. This allows me to receive a lot of information about how the students are working, and for the students to receive a lot of personalized information from me about how to work before we meet in that lesson. So asynchronous video exchanges like this, they also allow for a lot of flexibility, right? Because we don't have to dash frantically between classes or meetings or rehearsals. Because we have a video already waiting for us on the cloud or on our device, we can find the right moment to watch the video or to create a video. We don't have to share that information only when our schedules happen to overlap. Instead, we can share information whenever it suits us and still meet for lessons more or less the usual way, using that information and workshopping it creatively together in those synchronous lesson meetings.
I am so proud to have my course with Discover Double Bass, Beginner's Classical Bass, out in the world. This was a long time coming, friends, and this course is designed, as the name implies, for beginner bassists who want to learn how to play classical music, or for more experienced players who wish to revisit the foundations of technique. The course is comprised of 66 lessons over 4 hours and covers a wide range of topics on classical bass, which will make a real difference to you playing. It is the perfect course for beginners. I feel weird saying that since it's my course, but I definitely believe in it, to build a solid foundation of double bass technique and to help you feel confident playing. Many of the lessons include transcriptions of the pieces, exercises, and etudes, so you have everything you need to practice at home. I spent hundreds of hours putting this together over the last few years. I'm so glad to see it out in the world. We have a link to it in the show notes, or just visit discoverdouble.com/Jason Heath. This episode is brought to you by the Practisma Practice Journal. And here's Practisma author Susanna Klein on an incredibly important topic for practicing.
Confidence is important. I think it's really fundamental to sort of not beating yourself up in the practice room. Not just because we deserve it, because I think we do. I think we deserve to be happy. But also because, if you're not happy, you get all tense. And especially for string instruments, tension is the killer of all good things sound related.
I'm a big fan of this journal. I've gone through all 16 weeks myself on my own personal journey. It is so cool what Susanna's created. It's packed with research-based strategies to turn your ho-hum practice into extraordinary practice, and it really works. Learn more at practisma.com, where you can download the introductory chapter of the journal for free. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. Yeah, and videos can be such a great learning tool. It might not seem like that big a thing, but once you start really thinking about it, the implications of being able to scrub back and forth and rewind, through the video and zoom in on a moment. I mean, it really is a incredible learning tool.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. Not only can, as you point out, not only can someone watch the video whenever we like, but we can also pause, rewind, repeat, pause and take some notes, jot down some questions we may have, watch it in slow motion, freeze frame it, save it in our archives for review or comparison later on. We can do whatever we like. Actually, Will Cravey, who was my sabbatical replacement last year and would be a great guest for your podcast if he hasn't been already, he found a great pedagogical advance by watching videos in mirror image so that the person modeling the movements is seen by the viewer as, oh, that's myself in a mirror, rather than, oh, that other person over there playing bass, So I sense that there are ways of using these tools that we haven't even begun to tap yet. The only thing we agree not to do with these shared videos is to share them with other people without the consent of both parties, because this helps us maintain the uniquely personal space that makes music lessons or artistic apprenticeship so impactful.
Okay, so this is a great new tool that can be used in so many different ways. Give us a picture of what this looks like for your teaching.
Okay, so I have an image for you. It's what I call a learning triangle, right? So picture one big triangle divided into 4 internal triangles. So you have one on the top of the triangle pointing upward and 2 on the bottom pointing down to each of those corners. And then you have one triangle in the middle. These are the 4 components of learning I focus on in lessons, if you can picture that. So the top internal triangle is performances, right? This is where we reach for the sky as artists. This is the pinnacle of our artistic work. This is the part of the pyramid that people can see from a distance, right? It's what we show the world. The 2 triangles along the bottom are the foundation of the triangle. These 2 triangles represent fundamentals training on one side and deliberate practice of whatever it is that we intend to perform on the other side. And all of this is held together with the middle triangle of our weekly lessons. Like a keystone in an arch, the lessons triangle draws together the work in the outer triangles. So my goal as a professor is to guide students to become their own teachers. This happens as they learn self-management and self-coaching skills, how to listen and observe, so that eventually our self-teaching takes over that middle triangle rather than weekly lessons with the professor. But do you have a picture in your mind of that big triangle made up of 4 internal triangles?
Yeah, bottom triangles are fundamentals and practice. Top triangle is performance with lessons in the middle. And I'll put this in the show notes in some way so people can see that visual also.
Okay, great. I'll send you a little image that I show my students about that. Exactly. So my approach with this new hybrid teaching model of asynchronous and synchronous learning, we're all learning these terms, right? So hybrid, asynchronous, and synchronous. But my approach with this new model is to make the outer triangles asynchronous through video exchanges each week, and only the inner triangle synchronous through a regular online lesson each week.
Okay, so walk me through what a week looks like for one of your students.
Okay, sure. Each student sends me 3 videos a week through a shared OneDrive folder. We use Microsoft Office 365 because that's what Ithaca College has available for all the students who go there. So students have cloud space, they have these apps, they're downloadable to their devices, and they already have access to it. So each student sends me 3 videos a week through this shared folder, right? A practice video at the beginning of the week, a performance video in the middle of the week, and a fundamentals video at the end of the week.
So I remember asking for videos from students in the past, and then I have no idea what to do with them. So what do you do with those videos?
Well, I watch them, and then I give them responses in one of 2 ways. Either I send them a response video by just dropping it into the same folder I share with that student, or I write notes in a shared notebook using an application called OneNote. It's kind of like that Harry Potter book in which the ink magically appears when I or the student make entries in there. So we can type, draw, or we can put PDFs of scores in there. We can add links to articles or videos, or make annotations and highlights to the repertoire they're working with. We can draw with a mouse or a finger on the computer or a smartphone or a tablet or whatever's handy. We can even leave voice memos for each other in that application, or bass playing memos. Here's an example of that phrase. And we also use OneNote to keep track of our practice logs and grading for the course.
I didn't realize you could do all that with OneNote. That's one of those apps that I've sort of been aware of, and I'm just stuck in my ways using the tools I use. So you're giving me some really interesting research projects for the rest of the week. So thank
that's
you.
Good, because I think you're the one who introduced me to OneNote years ago, and I thought, well, what would I ever do with all that? I don't need that thing.
That is incredible. Wow. Okay, so on your end, what's it like?
Okay, so for me as the teacher, on Monday and Tuesday, I'm looking at a 15-minute practice session video from each student. I'm looking at a performance video on Wednesday and Thursday. These are usually 3 to 6 minutes in length. And then at the end of the week, I'm looking at a video of them doing their fundamentals routine, which is usually about, 15 to 20 minutes long. And I'm also checking in on their work and journaling reflections in their notebook along the way. And of course, somewhere in the week, we meet for a regularly scheduled lesson. That meeting is online over Zoom, and it's only a half hour long rather than an hour long. That's because, of course, I'm receiving a lot of information from them before that lesson meeting. And also, they're receiving a lot of information from me, meaning they've already experienced a lot of teaching from me before we meet for our half-hour synchronous lesson. And of course, if any student needs extra time, I've always found a way to provide that. So plenty of office hours, and it doesn't even have to be an office hour, right? It can just be a short meeting. It's so easy to just see someone for 4 minutes over Zoom without it having to be a sign-up sheet outdoors and all that, not outdoors, outside of the office and that kind of thing.
Yeah, you're doing in a much more sophisticated way something that I've been recommending to private teachers since the pandemic hit, which is reimagine these experiences. It just challenge that 1 hour traditional lesson format that's been around for decades or centuries, and use these tools. You have kind of like a therapy session with the person based on all the learning that's happened before. It's kind of my line, and I've mentioned this to teachers, and I see blank stares, and the elegance with which you're doing this, I just think is so cool.
I know there are teachers who can have the student walk into the practice room. I mean, I know there are teachers who can have the student walk into a lesson and say, great, play me that. Cool. Here's 3 points. You understand number 2? Demonstrate that. Yes, but lift your elbow. Great. Let's move on to the next material. Thank you. That's awesome. Perfect. Here's 4 more ideas for you about that. Jot those down, and boom, end of lesson hits. But lessons never feel like, I don't know if it's who I am or the kinds of relationships I have with my students, but it's very personal when they walk into the room, right? Like, how's your uncle, or whatever happened with your cousin? I mean, just even like, so how's it going? It's like, well, actually, oh boy, here we go. It's not, oh boy, here we go, like there's something wrong with the student, but oh boy, here we go. This personal connection has to be attended to. So this format sort of separates that lesson time from the exchange of critical information.
Yeah. Well, it's such a great, because there is the critical information, yes, we do have to have our first finger curved and on a natural, but how are you doing? How's it going? And so again, elegant is the word that I think of. And what you're describing sounds like a lot more than an hour of time per student per week. That's just my sense of it.
Absolutely. That's true. They're definitely getting their share of the bargain. And I'm learning to become more efficient and organized with my side of asynchronous exchanges. But, lots of teachers give tons of extra time to their students. We always have. My teachers have always done that for me. There was, it just always felt like that door was always open. And so, yeah, it's not about limiting their lesson to being a half hour. It's just about rearranging that time. And the truth is that right now I'm in a position where I can put some extra time to the students. Reinventing this is worth it. It's something that we're all challenged to do, and it requires that kind of additional attention and energy.
Yeah. So talk us through your experience with these 4 triangles.
All right. Well, First, I admit that I'm really excited about these results. It's a complete game changer for me. I feel that I'm actually doing some of the best teaching I've ever done right now, which I know is surprising probably to hear. I also can admit that I was pretty skeptical about online teaching.
Yeah, me too. It's something that I've always, but this great experiment we're all, whether we want to or not, going through. You're definitely finding some serious silver linings. So talk us through this format that you got.
Okay, so let's start with the top triangle, performances, right? Ironically, music students don't really perform as often under the usual model as they could be performing. Of course, over a semester, we have things like speaking auditions, mock auditions, juries, recital hearings, weekly studio class, where they can perform. And of course, they might perform a bit in lessons. But now a student is submitting a performance video every single week. So there are many more performances, and that comes with a lot more accountability. So under the usual model, the old model, a student is so often playing something for a teacher in a studio class, and it's like the first time the student has actually performed it. No matter how often we recommend or admonish students to record themselves in the practice room and to evaluate that recording before a lesson or a studio class, we all know this happens far too infrequently. But these videos no longer represent the first iteration of a performance for the students. The student has to look at that video, and frequently the student will choose video number 4 or 5 rather than the first attempt. So this means that the student is becoming a teacher and able to address the low-hanging fruit that shows up in any of our first attempts. So already something fantastic is happening with that. And it's followed up by my opportunity to engage the student at more subtle and sophisticated artistic levels. So rather than the stuff that shows up in the first attempt. So by the way, the same is true for my teaching response videos, right? I find myself teaching something on a video and then trashing that response and starting over with a clearer, more organized second teaching attempt. So this gives me the chance to scrutinize my own teaching objectively, reconsider it, and make improvements before I send it to the student and try it out on the student, And of course, there's a subsidiary benefit of these performance videos that the students send to their professor. They can be shared with colleagues too, with other students. If you're in a lesson, it's harder to share that performance. But they can also build a library of performances that they feel really good about, performances they can stand behind. Maybe capturing a great video of their performance of a piece or an etude or something will allow someone to share their work with other musicians, or maybe with a family member who's far away or feeling isolated. Here's an etude I've been working on, Grandma Josephine, check it out. I hope you're feeling better. Or they could post it on social media or use it for a festival audition or for another audition, like kind of a calling card if they capture something great. I've always thought about the, jazz trios who play 4 nights at the Village Vanguard and record all those nights after being on the road for 6 weeks or something like that. It's really a great treasure trove of captured material to draw on. There's got to be something great in there. And the same is true for these videos for the students.
This episode is brought to you by Dorico, which is Steinberg's next generation music notation software. And Dorico, I love Dorico. I can't say enough good things about it. I actually discovered it through fellow podcaster and incidentally bassist Garrett Hope's podcast, The Portfolio Composer. And I was thinking, what is Dorico? I went down the rabbit hole and oh my goodness, it's one of those pieces of software that has totally changed the game for me. It's made me want to compose more, which I rarely had wanted to do before. It's made me want to arrange more. It's made me create exercises more readily. I can't say enough good things about it. We've actually got Daniel Spreadbury, who's the senior product manager for Dorico, on the next episode, talking in depth about it. And I'm a true fan. It's like when I discovered Modacity, my practice app of choice. That's how I feel about Dorico so strongly. Dorico.com will take you to their page on Steinberg's website. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. There is this mode in my practicing app, Modacity, which I totally love. It's called deliberate practice, and it's such a cool feature. Here's Modacity founder and CEO Mark Gelfo on how this works.
One of my pain points as a musician was like not really having a method to generate reliable improvement. And deliberate practice is like the scientific method for music practice. So what you do is you identify the one thing that you want to improve, be it articulation, intonation, emotion, comfort, whatever it is you want to improve, and brainstorm or choose one of the pre-suggested strategies for that area of improvement, and then test it out. Record yourself trying that strategy, listen back, and press yes, it worked, or no, it didn't work, to create that improvement.
It's such a clean way of tracking your progress. I do it every day, and it has done wonders for my bass playing and just my overall enthusiasm for music. You got to check it out. Modacity.co is the site, and if you go to our site, you can click through it and get a special offer for lifetime access for this app. Thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast, Modacity. Yeah, the power of having to put something down and say, here, I made this, in the words of Seth Godin, one of my favorite authors. You know, the self-reflective person would say, is that the best I got? Is that really the best I got? And the answer generally is no, because you know, there's improvement in everything. So it things that we've been saying since we were students in the 90s. I mean, I had microcassette recorders and then mini disc and all that sort of business, but I so infrequently used it. Just getting into the habit of doing that has so many benefits for the learning process and for all these other ancillary benefits you're describing.
Yeah, and it's not just the is that good enough, it could be better thing, but it's also the realization that this is where I am with this right now. Actually that's about as good as it's going to get right now without some help, you know? And that's where we want to meet the students. So it's not just more. It gives us the opportunity to put our finger on the pulse of where we really are artistically and what specifically is going on. And once we know that, we can begin to address it.
And then another part of the triangle, I always am so confused when I meet a bass player and I say, what do you do for fundamentals? And they say, what do you mean? I just get out the bass and start going. I practice a lot of fundamentals. I know it's so important. So how do you address fundamentals?
Right. We all know how important they are, but somehow the vicissitudes of academic life can just push fundamental work in the background in lessons. Like all summer at Domaine Forget, we deal with fundamentals. And it's such a great feeling to have that time set aside for deep work like that, for anyone who's there to just completely take apart how it works. But in the school year, I don't know. I always used to find myself thinking, gosh, I'd love to work on that bow hold, and I'd love to build a balanced head, neck, and shoulders girdle through a half hour of body awareness exercise in your lesson today. But oh boy, your jury is just 2 weeks away. So let's put out the big fires first. Okay, E flat in measure 2, not E natural. Be sure you enter after the piano rolls that chord in measure 96, not with the piano, that kind of stuff that we always see. But now the expectation is that the expectation has always been that this fundamentals work is happening all the time, no matter what's coming up. But now they make a video for it. So there's actually a reporting, a presentation of that fundamentals work each week. And there's a framework for actually doing it, which is a kind of other performance or accountability, right? So what's provided here is the opportunity also for me to lead fundamentals work. I've done that with scales classes and technique classes in the past, but now I can share videos that I send to the students. And it's fun for them when they're alone in some place to play along with me. It helps them to feel less isolated during the pandemic, and it also provides structure and modeling for their work and for these fundamentals activities. I think of it like a yoga class. Instead of going once to a yoga class and then saying, okay, cool, now I can do it at home by myself. There's something that can be appealing about joining a fitness video or being led through a series of Qigong exercises online. So it's also easier to stay on task and keep focused on the fundamentals exercise rather than just some generalized feeling of, play bass real good now,
So are you making them instructional videos or play along videos for the fundamentals?
Yeah, I'm doing both. So I have instructional videos, which might break down each of these fundamentals exercise. Those will be longer, right? Because it takes time to explain how each of the activities works. But then I also have routine videos in which, once they understand the activities, we just move through a series of exercises along with like a personal trainer or a circuit timer. We use an app called Seconds Pro. It's like egg timer practice, 20 seconds this, 30 seconds that, 45 seconds this. And the great thing about that app is that you can share those routines with each other. You can modify them. You can copy little bits out of one routine and paste it into your own personalized routine. You can lengthen them or shorten them and just highly personalize it. So I have always taught fundamentals. It's always been a big part of well, it's how I learned and what I teach. But and I always try to help a student design their own personalized daily routine that allows habits to form. But the critical component here is that I can check in on it every week as their teacher. And that allows me to help guide the student to form the desired habit without anything else slipping in there. I could never drop down into 15 different practice rooms each week to observe students doing fundamentals work. There's just not time or the infrastructure to organize something like that. Not in real life, but there is with asynchronous video exchanges.
A favorite topic of mine the last few years has been deliberate practice. I've been chatting with several people about the topic, from Jason Haheim, who's the timpanist for the Met, principal timpanist, and hipped me to Talent is Overrated, which I'm reading right now, and Anders Ericsson's Wonderful Peak, and so many other things. And there's a great deal, in my experience, of confusion between fundamentals and deliberate practice. So can you talk us through that distinction?
Yeah, those are great books. Those books, there's a bunch of them. Talent is Overrated, The Talent Code. There's the Malcolm Gladwell's books, Outliers, and so many great resources out there for talking about this. But the idea is that fundamentals, there's a lot of sports analogies in those books. You can think about golf, right? Fundamentals in golf, it's not a round of golf. It's a focused exercise that addresses one specific habit building activity. So in golf, for example, maybe just taking the club head away from the ball is the fundamentals activity. You might never even touch a golf ball in this exercise. You might just pull the club head back. Notice how the body is balanced and where does that movement begin? These kinds of things. Some people in the music world call these kinds of activities warm-ups, but typically a fundamentals activity is a very simple, repeatable, achievable, and easeful and familiar physical movement, isolated and removed from the context of performance. Deliberate practice is more about working on specific repertoire or passages of music. So here's something I'm going to play in real life while I'm out there in the world, elevating the human condition through the art and practice of music. How can I get better at that passage of music? So how can I reach more listeners? How can I connect more deeply with the collaborators? How can I make the sound that's in my heart or in my ears? Or, that has more to do with repertoire and passages and rehearsing those things for induction.
So how on earth do you teach something like deliberate practice?
Right, exactly. How indeed, especially if we're not down in the practice room with the student observing it in process, right? So I'm sure the same is true for so many artists, but I always learn so much about my own playing from listening back to my own practice sessions, right? It's such a revealing way to teach myself, sometimes sobering, even horrifying to observe how inefficiently I work or how unorganized I am or what I'm letting slip by. Yikes. It's also useful, though, to see some things that are working. Wow, that's really working. Maybe I can find that same feeling over here in the piece or, but man, over the last 15 years of teaching at Ithaca College, I know that I've asked students to send me examples of their practice sessions but maybe just a handful of times. I probably should have been doing this much more often. We've also seen this used in master classes and lessons, right? Where we ask the student to demonstrate what their practice of a passage might look like. Although this can be useful, these moments, I don't know, they always feel a little stiff and inauthentic to me. I feel like I want to say, really, you truly practice like that? Or does it just look like that right now that you're on stage in front of your fellow classmates in a class? I just haven't asked it often enough to observe my students practicing. And, when I was a student at Rice in the early 90s, I remember being startled when Paul Ellison would suddenly open the door of the practice room adjacent to his studio and ask me, "What are you doing?" Not only were those specific moments incredibly awakening, but they also left me with an increased consciousness and accountability, even when he didn't open the door, right? Because maybe he was listening outside, or maybe somebody else was listening. And Francois Rabat has a way of teaching that's like that, that's always stuck with me. He would say, "Mon amour, why?" And I say, "Why what? Why do you do that? Why do it? Why am I crushing the E flat? Because then I just need to put the and then so do it." That was what a lesson would be like. All he said was why, and now 30 years later, I still hear him in my practice session. Why you do that? So I don't know. And then practicing in front of colleagues, or I remember practicing at Joel Quarrington's house, knowing that an artist of that magnitude can hear me working, very informative. I've read about, great world-class surgeons in those Malcolm Gladwell books that you were referencing, who have other doctors observe their operations and give feedback, just to assure they're not missing anything. But with all of us at home in isolation, we don't even have those kinds of experiences to keep us on track. So yeah, receiving these videos is huge.
Well, and these videos must give a teacher some real insights.
Oh, brother. We just finished our 4th week of classes here, and already through these videos, I've had the most spectacular insights into the way my students work. Not only do I understand how they are working or not working, but I can reference the video and help them understand why habits are not or are not being formed, and what approaches might work better for assuring that their deliberate practice session work shows up in performance. So, I could take a video and show them, look what's happening at 4 minutes and 25 seconds into your video. How many times did you botch that rhythm? And then how many times did you execute it the way you intended? Which habit do you think will persist in performance? Pretty basic, a lot of it, but because there's a lot of low-hanging fruit there for younger musicians who are just starting off on this. And it's so critical because this is where they spend most of their time, alone in the practice room, right? So I no longer just leave them in the practice room to flail along trying to reinvent the wheel. I can see what they're after and show them a strategy that I've learned that someone else showed to me that works really well in that situation, So deliberate practice is different than fundamentals. It involves a plan, an execution, reflection, a hypothesis about a different way to do it, and then, an execution of that, more reflection, and lots of specific skills that can be taught. Like students can learn to do things like slow practice. They can learn how to make reductions of lines. They can learn how to organize a big project into smaller, manageable chunks, how to work from the last cell of a phrase backwards to the first cell, so that as the student moves through that material, each working from cell number 7 and then working on number 6 and then number 5, they're always tumbling into material that has already been covered, rather than working on 1, 2, and 3, you tumble into material that you haven't covered yet. Students can learn how to internalize passage work through rhythmic variations like the Glamian rhythms. They can learn how to work one passage one component at a time, for example, using robust cycles, right? Left hand, right hand, body, release, expression, 5 activities that you cycle through. And of course, they can learn how to practice the repertoire without playing the repertoire 100,000 times and killing it.
And sharing this kind of information, though it was possible when you and I were in school in the early 90s, it would involve setting up a video camera, passing this back and forth. So the technology that we have here in 2020 has really opened things up. So how do you use that technology? Do you send them notes or video response to their practice video?
Yeah, both. I might make a notation in their OneNote notebook, or like I said, a drawing, or leave a memo, or I send them a response video demonstrating something useful, maybe one of those skills.
So can you give us an example?
Say I want to show what slow practice might look like for the D7 run in the first movement of the Bottesini Concerto No. 2 that we all play, right? So I might model slow practice approach for them in a video and show them, here's what it looks like, here's how it sounds. And then this is the great part. Rather than saying the same thing in every lesson for each student, I can save that video to my library and share it with any student working on that passage in the future, or with a student who just wants to know what slow practice might look like. I can build an arsenal of useful videos over time.
And anybody who's taught for any length of time knows the feeling of saying the exact same thing in every single lesson.
I know, right? That's the gig, right? Closer to the bridge. David Allen Moore says he could take a week off of teaching each year if he could just have back all those moments. But, also sometimes we notice something happening in a studio and we want to address it with each student, or with all of the students, either with each or with all. But this is an efficient and effective way to do that. But it's important to remember that none of this replaces the sacred experience of one-on-one exchanges in individual lessons. That can never be replaced. I'm not suggesting that or advocating for it. I'm not saying, I teach this passage of Bottesini this way no matter what. No, we always teach the student, not the material. But as a modeling of what slow practice might look like, that video could be a useful tool in my library for students to look at. Or if I wanted to show them, what I learned when I took Edgar's approach to that passage apart frame by frame, a video showing that might be a useful tool for students. So these video models offer I guess the other thing is they offer learning paradigms that aren't always practical or feasible in the normal synchronous learning paradigm. Like, for example, through video sharing, I can teach students by ear or by rote. By rote learning is a powerful and deeply penetrating modality for learning music, which has been guiding our music for 40,000 years, right? Like, written documents is a blip on the radar of human experience with music. So we usually don't have time for that in a lesson to teach someone something by rote. That's why we love these summer festivals and times when we can gather together outside the rigors of normal daily life, retreat centers and that kind of thing. But with a video in the archive, just drag and drop, and here's something for someone who'd like to spend an hour learning something by rote. But actually, the real and most impactful benefit is probably their own accountability for these deliberate practice sessions. It's very different to ask a student to take the Mozart 35 fourth movement runs and passages through the Galamian rhythmic variations, and do that for practice this week, than it is to ask them to make a video of yourself playing those rhythmic variations for your teacher to review. Suddenly the student wants to check in about it. Wait, what's that third variation again? And how does that actually go? And it's a lot more accountability, and that's huge.
So we've covered the outer triangles, performances, fundamentals, and deliberate practice through asynchronous video exchanges. What about the lessons themselves? What about those synchronous meetings? Are they being recorded?
Absolutely. But lessons have always been recorded and reviewing required. In fact, we were recording our lessons with VCR tapes in 1990 with Paul Ellison. He recognized that the powerful pedagogical learning that can take place through videos and self-observation is critical, and he required us all to do it. So accordingly, I've always recorded lessons and have had the students take notes on their lessons. So my approach to the lesson meeting itself hasn't changed very much, except that we meet over Zoom right now because of the pandemic rather than in person. But we schedule these lessons the same way that we always have, even though they're on Zoom. We still have to find time when we can meet. And so I do with the students what I did with Paul, 30 years ago. The student puts the academic class schedule into a calendar and also includes all of the other weekly activities, including rehearsals, health and wellness activities, standing social engagement, rest time. Anything that is important to that person goes in there. Big rocks go in the jar first. You know that analogy. So the next step is to schedule practice time for each week. So to schedule it as if it were a meeting, because this deliberate practice, these fundamentals practice, this is also a big rock. It's just that it has flexibility. So students start to ask how much practice time is scheduled each week, and when does which kind of practice function best for me? What kind of work do I do in the morning slot, and what kind of work can be productive at the end of an exhausting day? And then, of course, we all try out our schedules and make changes as needed, because as the realities of life set in, we realize, I might need to eat and get outside for a bit in the middle of this day. So where else can I schedule that practice session? And then you play with it until it is working. And then once we find the right time for a lesson, meaning the best time when we're both available, we set up our lesson, and it's a weekly recurring lesson. But what's different about lessons under this new model is this. They're much lower stress now. We've already exchanged so much information through the videos and shared notebook that this time feels much more relaxed and open. We can follow up on whatever the student or I identified during the week. We can play together or talk through something together, something that's come up. Essentially, we can use the information we've already exchanged rather than use that precious shared time to exchange information. This model is more frequent, lower stakes lesson experiences over the week, and it's becoming increasingly more stress-free.
Well, and stress-free is something we could all use more of in our life, so it's great to hear that. And how do the students like the arrangement?
Actually, I polled them about this, an anonymous poll, and they do like it. They like the teaching arrangement a lot. What they talk about in the poll is that they're having a hard time with the isolation caused by the pandemic. And although they're completely united in the view that 100% online learning is never going to replace real college life experiences with the power of social learning and intimate groups that comes with that, they are feeling really positive about this format and structure of this learning environment. They all prefer this to 1 hour Zoom lessons once a week for sure. The audio and video quality using Zoom to try to do that in real time is just not nearly as good as watching videos, and it's enjoyable to watch and hear. They can also see a lot of progress in themselves already, even this early in the semester, and they're feeling increasingly comfortable with putting themselves on video record 4 times a week. They're also increasingly more at ease and familiar with the use of the technologies, and there was a pretty big learning curve with that initially, but they're doing well with it now. And they appreciate so much access to me. They write about that. So importantly, though, they feel an increased sense of accountability. And although accountability can be uncomfortable for any of us, it's not always a good feeling. And although it's expressed in different ways in the survey responses, it's clear that there's a lot more accountability. But the main thing that's expressed in their survey responses is that they just miss being in person together. They miss socializing with their friends. And being out in the world, the bass studio at Ithaca College has always been this super tight group of students, family dinners, close bonded friendships that endure many years after graduation, that kind of thing. So they all miss that desperately.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to 2017 with the wonderful bass convention that you hosted, and it's just so cool to see all these bass players from all corners of the globe united together, and I just can't wait to get back to that. What would
Me too.
Yeah, right. Well, all of us, I think, could second that. What would be your response to the poll results?
Yeah, like them, I miss the intimacy of music in real life arenas, bringing people together, building connections. Playing in a bar every week, I miss that desperately. I also miss my students. I really love my job because I love working with them. So I miss that. Two of them actually live together in the same house right now. So when we have studio class, they're both on the same screen together. I can't tell you how that fills my heart up to see them together. So yeah, I'm the same as them in that regard. However, if we could, magically download a vaccine on our smartphones today and just inoculate everyone and resume, quote, normal life, I would not be able to let go of and go back to the old, let go of this new model and go back to the old model. Letting go of the benefits of this new way of working feels like a step backward. Obviously, I wouldn't choose fully online. And I don't know what it would look like exactly, but having seen the value of some of these new approaches, I can't imagine not capitalizing on them in the future. In the meantime, it's been really fun to be working on something that feels like it is, or like it might evolve to be even better than it was before.
Well, the asynchronous, the way you're harnessing asynchronous, now we're off the script, so it's like I can bumble around and try. But the way that, so let me actually try to find a better phrasing of that. The blank stares that I get from teachers when I mention this model that you're using, I mean, it's just so powerful because, like you're saying, as soon as you can't trust your ears, and it's you probably better not trust your ears on Zoom listening to a musician play. You're on shaky ground. The technology that pretty much anybody, and certainly pretty much any college student has just in their phone alone, the quality of video that you can capture using contemporary technology is high enough that you can do so much with that. And it's one of those things. I remember bringing up Jason Haheim again a couple months ago, talking to him about the silver linings, like what we've been talking about. He said, the best thing about Zoom, that record button right up in the corner, and how students should be using that. And I think back to 6 years ago, 7 years ago when I was teaching high school, I just got in the habit of recording all my rehearsals during the day. And I had this evil commute. And so I found myself listening to all my rehearsals and still not being home. So that was the dark cloud. But the silver lining was that I was listening to all my rehearsals. And I started to, like you're describing, share with my students. Hey, look at measure 36 or minute 36. And let's listen to that. And I found myself playing those recordings in class, and it was just incredible. So I applaud what you're doing. And someone like you saying you're doing the best teaching in your life, my friend, that is saying something, because you have had so many incredible students go on to do so many different things, which is, to me, the mark of a truly great teacher. So I just think absorb that statement from Nicholas. It's really cool what you're doing here.
Thanks. I appreciate you saying that. Yeah. I mean, sometimes, what did they say? Necessity is the parent of invention or something. Well,
yeah.
We have the opportunity for a lot of parenting here. So
yeah.
We're all learning from necessity and invention.
Nicholas Walker. What an amazing person. He and I have been friends for probably the last 4 years or so. And like I said in the intro, he's somebody that I just get so much energy from. I had such a great experience being on the board of the International Society of Bassists with him. He and I were talking in 2017 about just directions for the ISB, and I threw my hat in the ring as, I think it was communications director, was my perhaps the first board role title I had, and then technology, and then marketing, and it was just such a wonderful time working with him. I am going to try to keep the unedited nature of these outros, so I think I may have to burp during these, so apologies. But I've been approaching these, and apologies if I go off and ramble a little bit. If you've listened to the podcast for a while, you might know I sit down and I do 4 at a time, so this is the first of 4. I'll probably become increasingly not coherent over the next few episodes in these outros. But if you're listening to this, either you are trapped somewhere where you can't turn off your audio, or you're a true fan and you just want to hear what's up. What is up? Well, here we are. It is October, late October, as I record this, 2020, here in San Francisco, fully locked down. Nothing's happening, probably similar to where you are, wherever you are in the world. But the podcast has been definitely a great buoy in the seas of insanity for me. And connecting with people that are trying to make the best of things is so wonderful. I will try to keep this short because I tend to ramble in these outros. I have been going down YouTube rabbit holes late at night and looking up podcasting mics, and I know I don't need a new mic. Really, I don't. I use a Shure SM58 these days. But I've been and the Shure SM7B, this is super technical. This is probably incredibly boring for most people. But anyway, the Shure SM7B, if you've watched any videos of podcasts being presented, I think of a podcast as an audio format, though it can also be video. You'll see that's a common mic. The Shure SM7B and what I use, the SM58, are actually quite similar. This is a stage mic, and the SM7B is a classic broadcaster mic. There are several competitors, including one by the wonderful company Rode out of Australia. Their pod mic, or I think is what it's called. And then Shure just released the M7, I think, which is a different version, a little bit brighter fidelity than the SM7B, and can also be a USB mic. But I have such a problem buying gear. You know, I'll go down the rabbit hole, I'll buy all this gear, and I don't even need it. And what I really need to do is just get better at my craft. I know that this SM58 is not holding me back. What's holding me back is me, and in whatever capacity I think of myself being held back in. So I'm trying to resist the urge, friends, because I know that I'll get one of those mics and that things are going to work right. I'm going to waste so much of time. What I really should be doing is finding more interesting things to cover, or connecting with people in more interesting ways, or doing better research, or writing more things. And it's not the gear, but I want the gear. So I'm going to wrap it up at that. And I want to thank the team. Thank you so much to the people that make this podcast happen, in addition to you, which you are the people that make this happen. If there was no one listening, we would not do this. But thank you so much to Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Mitch Mooring, Trevor Jones, and Krista Copper. Mitch Mooring makes beautiful basses, does beautiful work in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Look him up at mitchmooring.com. I am your long-winded host, Jason Heath, coming to you from San Francisco, California. Currently, what's the 61 and sunny? That's kind of nice for late October. And we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.